Hello and welcome back to the Creation Research Centre. And I'm here, of course, with Dr. Diane Joe, and we're going through the many different artefacts and fossils and exhibits that we have in the museum and looking at some of the evidence that they have in them.
Yes,
Isn't that right?
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
no, it's had a great time so far. Well, today, Diane, tell us about our topic. What have we got down here that we're going to be discussing today?
Well, here we have a few human bones, so we could talk about how well designed the human body is in spite of some of the criticism about the human body.
Well, yes, as I say, speaking about critics, I've got a quote here from a guy called Nathan Lents, right, who's a proponent of unintelligent design. He believes that design can come about unintelligently. And he says one of the biggest evidences for this unintelligent design is actually the wrist. Now, we have a human limb here, a human arm. You've got the bones and everything. But this is what he says about the wrist. He says that the wrist is way more complicated than it needs to be. He says the small area that is just the wrist itself has 8 fully formed and distinct bones tucked in there like a pile of rocks, which he says is about as useful as they are to anyone. So it's really this claim that they're useless, that they're a result of random mutations and random, thrown together over millions of years. No real use to these kind of wrists and these bones. But your medical biology background, correct?
Yes, that's
so
right.
So you know a little bit about these kind of things. So just take us down through the arm, through the wrist, and some of the design that it shows.
Well, in fact, the human arm is really designed very well. When you think about what is the main function of the human arm, it enables us to manipulate objects around us and interact with the world around us. And we are designed to be creative beings. We're designed to study the world around us and make use of it. And the human arm is brilliantly designed for that. If we start at the top, this is the main bone of the upper arm here. This round part forms part of your shoulder joint, so it is a classic ball and socket joint. We do use engineering terms because that's what they look like, and they function like engineering joints. And any engineer will tell you that properly functioning joints have to be designed. They don't come about by chance, random
it's
processes.
really difficult to try and get them to and do what they're supposed to do consistently as well. So, absolutely.
Yes, that's right. So this classic ball and socket joint, it rotates around like that. Now, a ball and socket joint is brilliantly designed in that it can move in a lot of different directions, forward, backwards, outwards, inwards, and even rotate on its long axis like that. Now, these knobs here are where muscles are attached to it. One of the main functions of bones, of course, is muscles attachments. So we have muscles in our shoulder that hold the whole arm to the rest of your body, of course, and the rest of the shaft of this bone forms important muscle attachments for bones that you might be familiar with, like biceps. All the bodybuilders know about their biceps.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Well, actually, part of that muscle has a long tendon that fits into this groove here. So, brilliant piece of construction here of compactness and flexibility and strength. So that orientates the entire arm in relationship to your body to reach things, so that gives you a big, wide range of reach. Then the elbow, which does function a bit like a hinge joint, but it's a bit more subtle than that.
Well, I noticed, first of all, we've got 2 bones down here to kind of connect to the hinge joint. So what are these 2 bones here?
They're called radius and ulnar, and the radius is this one here, and it's called radius because it can rotate.
Oh, well, there you go. It's as simple as that.
That's geometry, that's right. Okay, so you can see the top of that is actually round. And
so really, when you're doing this with your arm, you're kind of crossing those bones
over together.
I see.
And that movement occurs because the radius can rotate
completely
like
round,
that.
all the way around. That's fantastic.
Isn't that brilliant?
So this bone stays completely straight. This one then rotates over.
So this one acts more like a strut, stabilising the forearm. This one rotates over it, and that enables you to orientate your hand so that it's palm up or palm down or anywhere in between. And in between these 2 bones, you've got a flat fibrous tissue there, and altogether that acts as a big muscle attachment for the muscles that
down here
have long tendons that go down into your hand. Now again, that's a good piece of design because it means the bulk of the muscles are up here. You've got long tendons going down into the hand so that your fingers can stay nice and slender and slim. And you do have little muscles in the palm of your hand. We'll get to those. So radius and ulnar, again, good, clever design, a structure that's quite strong, but at the same time very flexible, very good for manipulating objects, orientating the hand to whatever you want to pick up and do things with.
Okay, so we've done the main bulk of the arm, but now what about these bones down here, the wrist bones? Because these are the ones that Nathan Lentz says are just as useful as a pile of rocks to a human arm. So what have we actually got down here? What's the detail?
Well, he's obviously never broken one of them. you can break them, actually, if you fall heavily on your wrist, but that applies to any bone in the body.
Sure.
No, they're not useless, because you think, again, going back to the function of the human arm, needs to be flexible, but it also needs to be strong. If you're going to pick up something or get a good grip of something, you need to have strength and you need to have flexibility as well. So the wrist not only bends up and down like that, it also bends from side to side. And that's important in holding things and manipulating things.
Sure.
And so this gives you a bit of extra flexibility, because all of these can move on one another just by a small amount, but a small amount can add up, as well as giving the whole thing a lot of strength, so that you don't have all of the forces involved in bending and moving from side to side imposed just on this one joint here, where the radius joins to the hand. So it's actually a piece of really clever design to give you strength and flexibility at the same time.
Right. So just run us down through some of the bones and their function. I know some of them have these big sort of things that sort of stick out at the side. I'm assuming we're looking at, what are we looking at? We're down here this way?
Well, some of them are muscle attachments, and this also forms a nice curve for tendons come down from the forearm here and actually go through a tunnel. There's a ligament that goes over the top of that, so some of these knobs here are attachment sites for the ligament, so that needs to be strong, and so that forms a tunnel and that directs the forces of all of the tendons that are going to go into the hand to control the fingers to make your grip strong.
So is that, when I do this with my hand, is that the tendon
there?
Those
are the tendons there, and the muscle, the contractile part of the muscle, is back up here, so it's out of the way, but at the same time the force from the muscle is conveyed in a controlled way down through the wrist here and into the hand. So that's actually a good piece of design. It gives support and protection to those tendons, as well as distribute some of the forces involved in moving the hand on the wrist.
And so then we get into the main bulk of the hand
itself.
itself.
This is the palm of the hand, yes. There are some little muscles there, so that's how we get all of the really subtle movements that we get with our fingers. And you think of all of the trouble that robot designers have had when they've tried to copy a human hand, and all of the little motors that they would have to put into it, and the fake tendons with using man-made substances like nylon and various other synthetic substances, which are not as strong as tendons. And there's some really subtle things built in here, right? You look at your own hand. When you open your fingers like that, you can spread them out and pull them together. Now, when you close up your fingers, now try and spread them out.
Can't really do it, can you? You just can't move it, can you?
That's right. But then if you want to pick up something like a handful of small objects or something like that, that's actually quite a clever design, because all of these little joints here aren't pure hinges. They're just slightly offset, just very subtle design, and it all folds in together to give you a good device for picking up things.
A whole load of small things and it's not going to run through the fingers.
Yes. That's right, but at the same time you can spread out your fingers and grasp something that's quite large.
Much bigger,
Yes. So a really piece of clever design, that. And it's only now with 3D printing and computer-aided design that we're actually able to design bones that have all of that those subtle curves and shapes.
Presumably it takes inspiration from stuff like the design of the hand as well. When they're creating robots and stuff, they're almost trying to replicate what a hand does, what the joints do. So a good kind of challenge to Nathan Lent then would be, well, if he wants to argue that this is a poor design, go and design a better functioning one, and then maybe you'll have an argument.
Well, we could say that to everyone. Like Richard Dawkins often comments that various animals, plants and human beings are badly designed, and we say, well, they do work. Now, just because we don't understand exactly how they work doesn't mean that they weren't designed. That just means that we're ignorant and we don't know enough. And the scientific approach is to go and do some more research and find out.
Actually have a look and see.
And that's what we've been able to do with modern scanning technology.
Yeah.
Now, we can actually study these. That's a whole burgeoning area of science. It's really opening up, called biomimetics, where people study how biological systems work, like the human hand, and then use that to design something that works in the same way. So notice they have to study this one first before they can design an effective one that works.
So biomimetics, that's miming the biological stuff. It's copying.
Yes, that's right.
It's copying what we see in biology and trying to apply that design in our robots, in our technology, in the things that we're creating and designing. So we're taking inspiration from what Nathan Lent says is a terrible design, a useless design, but really it's a marvellous piece of engineering that we can kind of pull together and even use in our own technology and our own work and stuff. So a fantastic, and of course you get into all the little phalanges down here, the little finger ends and their joints and how that all fits together. So it's just a beautiful design of a limb, really. Absolutely fantastic. Well, we've got other bones. By the way, Diane, these are all real bones, yes?
These are real bones, and it is legal to have real bones in some circumstances. In general, there are strict laws as to what you can do with human remains, but for scientific and medical purposes, you can have real bones, and we acquired all of these within the law, so we have them
so
legally.
we're completely above board.
Yes.
Well, let's go on to another limb now, because this is another one that Nathan Lent says is another poor design, and it's of course we've got the lower leg here. From you've got your kneecap up here, your patella down your leg, and then into your foot and the ankle, and all these bones down here. So again, what have we got in terms of design with this?
Well, we've certainly got something more than a pile of rocks. If you think about it, this is a brilliant piece of engineering, because think of the design specifications, if you like. You have to have something that can take your entire body weight when you're standing still without collapsing, and these are quite light. So things that are light but strong requires clever design, because you actually have to use the geometry of the structure, not just the sheer mass that it's made of. And then in order to walk, of course, you have to have something that is very flexible but still maintains the strength. And this is where this shape comes in. This is the classic arch of the foot. We've all heard of the arch of the foot. Well, in fact, there are three of those. If you look at the foot long ways, you've got an arch there and an arch on the inside and outside, so two there. And also, if we look at it straight on, okay, if you can see there,
arch.
You've got another arch
way,
there.
Right. I can see it.
So architects will tell you that arches are a good structure because they are strong. And it also means you've got a bit of flexibility, why you have separate bones rather than just a single arch.
So really you've got arches almost at right angles to each other, and so that just creates something that's exceptionally strong in its ability.
Exceptionally strong, but without adding a lot of mass to it. And again, because we have a collection of small bones rather than one single bone here, we have the ability for just a little bit of adjustment at each one of these joint surfaces here to give it a little bit more flexibility, a bit of spring in the step, as it were. And in fact, that's one of the things that distinguishes human gait, or how humans walk, that we do walk with this spring in our step. So again, Another piece of really clever design where you have to cope with strong forces, so you need strength, and you have to cope with movement in order to walk and run and skip and dance and do all of the things that human beings can do. And the other thing is the big toe here is tethered quite tightly to all these small toes. Now this gap here looks a little bit exaggerated because of the way this has been put together. But in life, there are strong tendons that hold that all together.
Sure.
That's another significant difference between an ape foot and a human foot, and maybe we can talk about that when we look at humans and apes. But going back to the design of the human foot, in fact, it is a good, strong design. The weight of the body comes down through the leg here, and about half of it is distributed to the heel, and about half to the forefoot here when you're just standing still. And when we walk, of course, we hit the ground with the heel, and then you roll the foot, and the weight is distributed to the big toe here. And for an instant, sort of all your body weight, if you're running, right, you lift the other foot off the ground, all your weight is briefly held by the big toe, but just for an instant. Yeah. But it's designed well enough and strong enough for that, and that now enables us to walk with that spring in our step.
But presumably, because most of, even though that poor big toe is only for a split second, but presumably because most of the weight is going to be on the heel, that's why this is such a huge, chunky bone, this heel bit here, compared to all the rest. You've got all your flexibility and all your angle, but that's a good chunky bone. So is that just to sort of take that full weight as you're standing and as you're sort of walking?
And when you and for each step you hit the ground with the heel and then roll over
forward as it goes. And then so finally, what's this thing up here then?
This is the patella, otherwise known as the kneecap.
That's the one which, if you stand straight, you can kind of wiggle it about a little bit.
You can wiggle it about a bit because it's an interesting bone. It's entirely contained within the tendon of this big muscle on the front of your thigh, quadriceps femoris it's called, because it's actually got four heads which converge together. And then you have a great big thick tendon that comes down the front of the knee, so it's got a protective function there, and this is where it attaches to the bone. So it is the muscle that straightens out the leg. So again, when you walk, you have to you bend your knee, your foot hits the ground, you have to straighten your legs, so you need a very strong muscle to pull your body forward there like that.
So does this provide protection to your knee then, when you're like you're kneeling down?
Yes,
if you're a gardener, you have like these big knee pads to look after yourself. Is this to kind of protect this joint where the bone goes into?
Yes, so you've got a big joint here. Now again, this looks like a classic hinge joint, and yes, you bend your knee, straighten your knee, but it's got some subtleties that we really only discovered when we started to replace diseased joints. Now, human disease is not because of bad design, it's because we live in a tough environment.
Sure.
And also because, like the rest of the world, our bodies are going downhill. The history of the world is from good to bad to worse. I'm sorry, we're all going downhill. So sometimes our joints wear out before the rest of our body does. And one way to treat a completely destroyed joint is to actually replace this surface. Now, when surgeons and medical engineers got together and thought, yes, we can actually replace this surface, the first design worked like a big, just like a big door hinge, but that did not work, because in fact the knee is not like a great big hinge. The femur, we don't have a femur, but if you can imagine the thigh bone here coming down here, it has two rounded ends that fit into these indentations here. Now, they're not exactly symmetrical, they're not exactly the same, and there's also, in the final straightening, there's a little bit of a twist. It's only a few degrees, but it's enough to make a huge difference, to hold the knee stable compared with when it's being bent. And they had to design two joint surfaces which would accommodate that just small twisting movement in order to get an artificial knee that
It
works.
actually works.
Yes.
Yeah. So even the tiniest subtle little differences, the things that you look and go, well, that can't mean anything. It's actually an incredible piece of design and engineering that's gone into this fantastic knee, bone, ankle, joint, all of that. Well, let's move on to another articulated set of bones. We've got a mixture of, I'd like to get an articulated skeleton at some point, but these are all old medical specimens, and obviously what we're looking at here, Diane, is your backbone, it's your vertebrae,
that's right.
and you've got all the bits in between and stuff. But also, I think let's talk about the design of this. But also, what I'm interested in is a couple of things here. Is to do with this part of the pelvis, the sort of the hip bone, but also this little thing down here as well, because we have connections here, of course, to the evolution of men, or the supposed evolution of mankind, and also vestigial organs and stuff as well. So tell us a little bit about the vertebrae here.
This is very important. In fact, this is a distinctive human feature, that we have an S-shaped spine and apes and gorillas and monkeys don't. And there's a good reason for that. We are designed to stand upright with a minimum amount of muscles needed to just hold us upright. And so our body weight gets balanced around a line of gravity that goes down through the body. So if you look at the this region here, this is the neck region.
So the head sits on top of here,
The head sits on top of there, right. In fact, that bone is called the atlas because it holds up.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so we have the cervical spine, or the neck bones, curving out in front there. Then we have the chest region, the thoracic region, where the ribs attach, and that's what these little facets here are.
So it comes round your side like this,
there, and that gives you the nice big shape that you need for your heart and your lungs to fit in. Then the curve changes again. We have a forward curve here. This is the lumbar spine, the small of the back, right? And the line of gravity will then be behind that. So we're balanced, right? Line of gravity behind, in front, behind, and then in front again. This is down in the pelvis. Now there are two bones that attach here that form a complete ring of bone, which is your pelvis.
So of course we have, I'm just thinking, we have mass on the back, we have mass on the front, and then we have a mass on top. So it's specifically designed to help hold those masses in place so that you can be upright and move forwards.
With a minimum amount of muscle contraction.
Yeah.
Remember, there are ligaments attached to all of this. And these things here are the intervertebral discs. You may have heard of these if you've had a disc injury.
Or something. Yes, I have.
Yes, I have too. They're made out of fibrous tissue and cartilage.
Yeah.
And so together we have a design for standing vertically upright, minimum amount of muscle movement needed to hold that. And that is a distinct human feature, really important. Now, if we come down to the bottom here...
So this is at the back part of the pelvis.
So this is the back of the pelvis, this is the sacrum. This is the part of the body that's considered to be a useless vestigial organ left over from when we used to be apes and monkeys. Apes don't actually have tails either, but...
Do they have a coccyx?
They do have a coccyx, yes, that's right, because it has a function. And all of these various knobs and bits that stick out of bones, they're there for a function. They are attachment sites for muscles and ligaments. Remember, the skeleton is part of a whole musculoskeletal system. It's part of a whole system that holds the body together and enables it to move. So the coccyx is a really important muscle attachment site and ligament attachment site for the muscles in your pelvic floor. So that literally holds up the organs in your pelvis, and also helps you to walk, because each time you take a step, of course, your whole hip bone moves. So very essential part of the body. It's just as useful as any other bone or part of a bone in the body.
So it's something we like to try and remind people who try and claim that this is a vestigial or leftover or it's useless is if you remove it and then try and navigate the toilet, it's not going to work very well because it's so essential in holding everything together. And I mean, if you bruise it, it's painful enough. If you break it, you can't even walk, can you?
No, you can't. It's just so painful to walk because you've got big, strong muscles all around here, big, strong ligaments. So any movement of those on a broken bone is just excruciating excruciating. Just ask anybody that's happened to. Yes.
Now, we can talk about this, and we can talk about how everything begins to kind of attach together, and we can talk about how really the evidence that we're looking of is this is somebody who is designed to walk upright, because this is now part of the pelvis, isn't it? Part of the backbone, and we've got a bit of the pelvis bone here. So this is this is the right side. Did you say?
Yeah, this is a right side.
So it fits on here.
Bone like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it fits in this little.
So it fits in there. Now these are obviously not from the same individual,
Yes,
so
it's give you a bit of an idea.
It's
how
not
it
a
goes.
perfect match. There are some very strong ligaments that hold this bone to the spine there. That's necessary because the body weight is coming down the spine and then it gets distributed between the two hips. But there's also a movable joint there. Again, flexibility and strength. All over the body we have that combination of flexibility and strength. So a movable joint there, you may have heard of it, the sacroiliac joint.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And it can get arthritis in it just like any other of these movable joints as well. But that's not a sign that the spine or any of these bones are useless. That's just a sign that our bodies are going downhill. The reason the spine is often considered to be a piece of bad design is that back problems are common in human beings, but like any other piece of machinery, the hardest working bits do wear out.
The quickest, yeah.
And we don't always treat them particularly well
No.
with the sorts of things that we try to do. So yes, they do wear out, they do get disease like any other part of the body, but again, that's a sign of the degeneration of the whole world as well as our bodies that we're all undergoing.
So these fit together, and this, obviously you'll have one on this side, one on that side, and that then joins to, we've got another ball and socket joint in down here.
Yes, down here we've got a classic ball and socket joint. Again, because this is where the whole limb is orientated, so that now this one is built more for strength rather than flexibility. So in fact, the ball more tightly is more tightly enclosed by the socket, but it still enables you the variation in movement. You can move your hip out and in backwards and forwards, and also rotate your whole leg on its long axis. And that means that we can walk on uneven ground and do all sorts of clever movements. I'm a bit of a clumsy clot, so I'm not very good at dancing, but there are some people who can do amazing things with not just with this joint, but with all of their joints together. But again, that's part of human creativity as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, we could talk about how, you know, the way that this is structured, the way that it's designed, the way that it fits together shows that this is designed for a creature or being that walks upright. But I think we're probably best to save that for next episode, because we're going to be talking about apes and humans and evolution and design and stuff like that. So we'll leave that. But there's something else that I'd like to talk to you about quickly, Diane, because we've got a mixture of other bones and limbs and various other things as well. And in particular, I quite like this one because you can actually see it's a bit broken off there, and you've got a lovely, I mean, you can see the incredible inner structure of the bone and how it all kind of fits together. It's referred to as almost the honeycomb structure. And I mean, just looking at something like a leg, right? We spoke about the kind of pressure that the poor little big toe has to go on when you're running or walking, and the toughness of this backbone to be able to take your weight. But just think about the amount of weight that this bone, you know, from the top down is having to put up with. And you can also have people who are morbidly obese, but they're still able to stand upright. The pressure on these bones are remarkable. So talk a little bit about the design, the internal structure in this. You can see in here as well, the sort of honeycomb structure that holds all this bone together so that it's able to take that amount of weight and take that amount of stress as the person is standing up and walking. Because, I mean, this looks like a marvel of engineering in there.
It is actually, it is a marvel of engineering. It's like architecture when you're designing a building that has to be strong, but you don't want too much mass in it. You don't want to just keep on adding more and more mass. But so you use the geometry, you work out where the various forces are impinging on it and make sure that there is some strong structure there to cope with those forces, but you can have hollow spaces in it, so you're using the geometry. A simple analogy that people would be familiar with is tubular steel. It's hollow inside, but it's extremely strong. So our bones are like that as well. They have a solid outer casing, as it were, but they are hollow inside. But inside, as you said, there is an amazing honeycomb sort of structure there, where you've got tiny little struts of bones, and they are in the exact right places for the forces that are impinging on your bones. And you see that particularly in the hip bone. If you see an x-ray of a hip bone, you can actually see some, and some of them are curved, and so that you can see where the forces are impinging on it, and the struts are designed
hold all together
to hold the bone together according to where the forces are impinging on it. Now, the really interesting thing is if those change, and they do change if you change your activity. For example, if you learn a new type of sport where you develop some muscles more than others that you weren't using, so you've got stronger forces in a different direction in the bone will actually remodel itself.
Right, okay, yeah. So it kind of, it can almost adapt then to different, and this is true adaptation here?
This is true adaptation. Adaptation is actually a design feature. It is the ability to adjust the structure or function of a living organism, of a living body, according to changes in the environment. Now, it is certainly limited. There are certainly parameters, as it were, within that framework that you can adjust. And that's what we observe in biology, in human function, in all other living things. They don't stay the same, they do change, but none of that change is evolution. So adaptation is a real biological process, but it's not an evolutionary process.
Because remembering back to my sort of, biology days when I was studying, if I remember correctly, there are two specific cells within the bone called the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts, which are actually designed, the osteoclasts anyway, are designed to break bone. They're designed to break bone down, and the osteoblasts build that bone up. So if here's my hand, right, if I was deciding to take on, tennis and learn tennis, and I'm needing to use all those ligaments and muscles in a specific way, and I'm building them up, my bones would actually break themselves and remodel them, reform them to help me to play tennis, right? So say I've taken up tennis, right? 6 months later, I'm really good at tennis and I've had a full change of my bone structure, right? Have I evolved? Because I've changed, but is there, have I evolved?
No, you haven't evolved, and this is the interesting thing in biology. There's lots of change. None of it's evolution. You haven't changed because you're still the same person made up of the same cells with the same DNA. All that's happened is that in certain parts of the body, some of that DNA for growing muscles, for laying down ligaments, has been activated and has been put to work. So that hasn't changed at all.
Right, so one step further then. Say I get really good, super professional at tennis. I've really built up my muscles, my bones are restructured, they're perfect for what I need to use them for. If I then have a child, am I going to pass that information for this perfect bone structure for tennis onto my child?
No, you're not. They're going to have to learn to play tennis all by themselves.
So there's no way of them passing this, change. It's real change, but we've already said it's not evolution. And you can't even pass that on, so my child can't evolve into a super tennis player. So really we're limited in what we can change and what we can adapt into. We're limited on what we can pass on to our offspring, on to our children. So really evolution is a dead end. And something I like to remind people, and a phrase that we use often in creation research, is we are designed to not evolve. Diane, what are we talking there? Because you've got stuff inside you, DNA, and that's supposed to have mutations, which is supposed to be the driving force of evolution, and then natural selection helps those creatures to adapt and change. But I mean, is your DNA designed to be able to change?
No, DNA is actually well designed not to change. There is a surveillance system that's at work all the time. This is going on in all of your cells now, a surveillance system that sort of cruises around your DNA and checks for mistakes and for damage, because DNA does get damaged just by normal wear and tear and forces in radiation, things like that from the outside world. So you're constantly checking your DNA, looking out for damaged bits, and there is a whole repair crew, which is an amazing system of so many different molecules all converging, taking out the damaged bit, replacing it with a good bit. Now, as you age, that repair process does break down. And mutations will do that. Mutations are just damaged DNA. Now, of course, DNA has to code for the repair bits as well. So if they get lost, well, the repair crew doesn't work as well. So that's the aging process, and it is caused by mutations. But again, you're not evolving. In fact, you're doing the opposite. You're going downhill. Evolution is supposed to be a sort of adding complexity process. In fact, all the observations we have of mutations is that they decrease complexity. So yes, we do have changes. We have changes throughout our life, but none of those are evolution. From the day you're born to the day you die, you are exactly the same person, the same species, and have the same cells. Some of them have been a bit knocked around, but they've definitely not evolved.
And of course that goes back to that curse which was given to man back in Genesis, dying you shall die. We've been going downhill ever since, not just in our own bodies, you know, we're born and eventually we die, but also those mistakes, the mutations, the downhill trend is passed from generation to generation, and we're at the point where we are today with disease, and we're in a pretty bad state overall. But that's why we need a saviour, because we need a new body. You need a new body, I need a new body.
I'm looking forward to
we're
that
going
very
to get
much.
one in the new heavens and new earth, where we will be back to our original perfect state that we were designed to be in the beginning, which is a wonderful promise and something that I certainly know I'm looking forward to. I'm sure you are as well.
Oh, definitely.
Well, we're going to move on to our next episode now, and next time we're going to be sticking with the human biology, bones and stuff like that, because we're actually, you can see we've got a wonderful collection of skulls on the back here, Diane. In fact, we start up here with our, this is another real human skull, isn't it? Really lovely thing, and we can talk about the design of that, but specifically what we want to talk about is, well, right at the other end, we've got Australopithecus afarensis, or better known as Lucy, right? Two skulls. Two very different looking skulls, and of course this one is supposed to be way back in our evolutionary ancestral, you know, tract, so we can sort of, you know, supposedly evolve from this kind of creature into the modern human. So we're going to be talking about design, but we're also going to be looking at apes and humans. We're going to be looking at human evolution history, and what we're going to be focusing on, aren't we, Diane, is really the differences between them, because you open up your books and you look in your films and you know, teachers' guides and whatever, and the one thing you always see, even walking around zoos, is the similarities between apes and humans. But really, the differences are the most important part, aren't they?
Oh yes, and they're the most obvious, really.
So there you go. In fact, we say you have to be trained in university for many years to miss them. So we're going to take you through in our next episode a discussion of apes, a discussion of humans, a bit of design, but also looking at that sort of history and created in the image of God. So be sure to join us next time as we continue carrying on around the museum, looking for the wonderful evidence that is held within.